Led Zeppelin is no doubt one of the greatest bands that's ever existed. During their 12-year run, they created songs that changed music forever. And today, decades later, their music is still relevant. Everyone who's interested in rock music, or really just music in general, knows them as one of the greatest bands of all time. But there is a huge blemish on the legacy of Led Zeppelin, and it's that they undeniably plagiarized lyrics, melodies, ways of singing, even entire songs. Because of that, there have been dozens of legitimate plagiarism claims and lawsuits against Led Zeppelin over the years. Considering how popular they were, it kind of makes you wonder if their success really belongs to lesser-known musicians. Let's figure it out. Now, there are plenty of places where you can find the many examples of Led Zeppelin's plagiarism, and I've linked a couple of good resources in the description below. But for now, I'll just mention two cases. As you might expect, the first one is Stairway to Heaven, which copied the riff off of the Spirit song, Taurus. I'm just kidding. Stairway to Heaven was probably not stolen, since its characteristic melody just follows a line cliche, which is a musical, cliche, which has existed in tons of songs, and it's been around longer than Led Zeppelin or Spirit. So the real first one is Dazed and Confused, which might be the most extreme example of Led Zeppelin's plagiarism, since so much was copied from the original. Jake Holmes wrote, recorded, and performed the song while opening for the Yardbirds in 1967. Jimmy Page, who was in the Yardbirds at the time, heard it and later included the song in the first Led Zeppelin album 2 years later. Now, many of the lyrics were changed to make the song sound more bluesy, but a few of the most distinguishing factors of the original song were copied by Led Zeppelin. Of course, the title, but also the vocal melody, that super important descending part that's in the bass and guitar. And even the idea of the long, trippy section in the middle of the song. Today, the songwriting credits read that it was inspired by Jake Holmes, but a co-writing credit seems like it would be more appropriate. The second one is Whole Lotta Love, which copies many of the lyrics and much of the vocal melody of the Small Faces song You Need Loving. To make matters worse, Robert Plant's voice in the song is practically an impersonation of Steve Marriott's, the singer of Small Faces. They sound so similar, it's like Robert Plant tried to grab the gravel from Steve Marriott's voice and shove it into his own throat. Today, the songwriting credits mention more than just Led Zeppelin, but that was only accomplished through lawsuits. Now, there's nothing wrong with drawing inspiration from other music and even referring to it in your own songs. You could use the same rhythms, melodies, lyrics, whatever else, as long as you give credit. Giving the right song credits to Willie Dixon, Robert Johnson, Bert Jansch, and so many others meant that some of the money and notoriety from the Led Zeppelin songs that were famous could go to their lesser-known inspirations. And for the fans, Led Zeppelin's legacy would look a lot better today. Music is like a collage. It's a combination of different ideas arranged in a certain way to hopefully create something unique and pleasing to the ear. There are so many musical ideas created by other people that mimicking someone else is pretty much unavoidable. This is definitely the case when you want to be popular, like Led Zeppelin did, since popular music is built upon a foundation of musical standards and cliches. But to most, including the music industry, there's a huge difference between using a tried and true blues chord progression or a line cliche in your song and impersonating someone's voice, taking half his lyrics, and using his melody in your song. But at what point do we stop punishing artists for using another's idea? After all, a musical standard is just an idea that became so popular for so long that people no longer knew its exact origin. These days, since recorded music can be definitively traced, it's easier for songwriters to point out copycats. Let's just look at the following. We already know that Robert Plant was heavily influenced by Steve Marriott's voice in Whole Lotta Love. But what I neglected to mention earlier was that Small Faces plagiarized the song themselves. They plagiarized it from Willie Dixon, who incidentally was a massive influence for Led Zeppelin. He wrote the song, and Muddy Waters was the first person to perform and record it, not Small Faces. And even though Willie Dixon wrote the song, it was a mixture of blues ideas and things he learned from the musicians around him. Different elements he combined consciously and unconsciously to create a great song. And we could just continue down this path until we figure out who came up with the blues chord progression, the person who came up with the lyrical tradition of the blues, even the blues way of singing. But even all those people took elements from elsewhere, and they're dead. Okay, I just want to take a minute here to point out how easy it is to discover plagiarism today compared to the 70s. With the internet, you can look up all the plagiarism claims for any song, and you can confirm the copycatting by listening to the plagiarized track, since you have pretty much every song that's ever been recorded at your fingertips. That's bad news for anyone who would want to plagiarize today. Back in the day, the easiest way to see who wrote a song was to grab a copy of the record and look at the attribution by the song name. If for some reason you thought a song was plagiarized, I guess you could ask the local record store guy if he knew anything. But information about this stuff was rare back then, so he was less likely to know. And it was the 70s. He was probably stoned and would just ramble about pet rocks or something. You'd be better off believing the printed song credits. The notion that music or musical ideas can be stolen is ridiculous. A song can't be physically stolen, and it can't be used up either. Concepts and ideas can only be used elsewhere with or without permission. In the case of having no permission, well, that's when it's plagiarism. And honestly, Led Zeppelin did this like it was their job. It's astonishing how many moments and lyrics in their songs are the exact same as older songs by other people. And it's really disappointing that they hardly ever gave credit to any of their influences. Now, borrowing an idea, even though it might just sound like a euphemism for stealing, is using an idea in your own work and giving credit. That's the key thing. It's important to give credit not just because it's the right thing to do, but because it sends a little cash and notoriety to everyone who deserves it. So, this is what Led Zeppelin should have done, but they didn't, and it's downright annoying to Led Zeppelin fans that they plagiarized so much. If they just gave credit, their legacy wouldn't be tarnished like it is today. Okay, so I've been crunching the numbers, and I think I finally figured out if it was worth it for Led Zeppelin to plagiarize or not. So the money that Led Zeppelin would have saved by not crediting the original artists, which is what they did, minus their legal fees and settlement fees from lawsuits and all that jazz, minus their eternally tarnished legacy. That's a big number. Comes out to be, yeah, they messed up. But I don't think it really matters too much. Yeah, it doesn't really matter, because in all of the songs that Led Zeppelin used and others' idea, many of the most memorable elements of the song are completely original. Sometimes it's just a guitar part or a vocal part, some of the lyrics that are the same, and the rest of the song is completely different. In fact, almost all of the actual music on so-called plagiarized tracks is completely original. Whole Lotta Love was way different than the Small Faces version and the Muddy Waters version. Other than Robert Plant's voice and some lyrics, almost everything else in the song is original. There's a completely different guitar part, bass line, and completely different drum beat as well. The most amazing thing to me is that huge guitar solo which just demands your attention. Of course, that crazy sexual psychedelic middle part right before the solo is also jaw-dropping. Over and over again, we see that the ideas that Zeppelin used were just jumping off points for the members to go off on tangents of originality. The plagiarized ideas, even in songs like When the Levee Breaks, where so many of the lyrics and general concept were copied, well, they were rarely the meat and potatoes of any of their songs. Even Dazed and Confused is different from the original by Jake Holmes. Of course, it's pretty much a cover, but there's a completely different drum part, bass part, massive guitar solo, and strange Robert Plant ad-libs. Yes, the main structure, the broad strokes of the entire thing is the same, but every single detail is different. To the group, more important than clever songwriting and lyrics was their own musicianship and creativity. The plagiarism might as well be a side note. Even if you wanted to boycott every single Led Zeppelin song that ever plagiarized, there are still tons of completely original tracks. Kashmir, Good Times, Bad Times, Immigrant Song, Ramble On, Going to California, Heartbreaker, the entire Houses of the Holy album. None of these things have any legitimate plagiarism claims against them. These guys weren't half bad. So yeah, to ignore Led Zeppelin's plagiarism is unfair to the musicians they took from. Musicians that were great in their own right. I mean, Zeppelin was inspired by some of the most influential blues musicians of their day. But to focus too much on the copycatting is kind of missing the whole point of Led Zeppelin's music. The thing is, despite their frequent plagiarism, they did so many new things that influenced countless musicians and changed what people thought was possible with music. Things that other people either weren't capable of doing or couldn't even imagine doing. Listen to the precision and complexity of John Bonham's drumming. Listen to how powerful, versatile, and charismatic Robert Plant's voice is. Listen to the heavy, driving bass lines of John Paul Jones. And Jimmy Page's guitar solos, they just speak for themselves. You see, the energy of the whole band was just out of this fucking world. So at the end of the day, when you listen to music, believe it or not, you shouldn't be so concerned with the legal issues of the band. You should be more concerned with how the music sounds to you. Does it sound good or not? For me, Led Zeppelin created some of the most exciting, powerful, mystical, just amazing music I've ever heard. I think that almost all of their plagiarized versions of songs were better than the originals, actually. And yeah, I wish that they never plagiarized, but I'm going to keep listening to them for a long time, as long as I can. What about you?